visitors coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good morning. It's been a long time for this journey. I remember a very similar meeting in a series of ones, but I remember a very important meeting in Johannesburg in 2003, where Zimbabwean civil society in these sorts of numbers came together to decide about an agenda. That was 15 years ago. But as speakers previously have pointed out, this is a process that takes a long time. And I think if you want to think about how long it takes and what kind of issues we deal with, we have to think about what Paul said, what Justice Nare said, and what Nomfunda said. And I'd like to give you a meta from my good colleague and friend, Undine Wande, who at a conference in Nyanga many years ago, drawing on the experience of Germany, tried to point out how long and deep the process of trauma lives in a society. So I want you to imagine yourself in the situation of being a victim. And as a victim, holding the finger of your first grandchild, this little newborn child. And then imagine the generations that go on. And imagine that newborn child, now with this grizzled hand like mine, holding the finger of her grandchild. That is the legacy of organized violence and torture. Right? It's multiple and multiple generation, and it needs to be dealt with. And it has to be dealt with in different ways. Now, I made the reference to 2003 because in 2003, the Zimbabweans there came up with a set of recommendations, but they also quite clearly saw that that journey of those fingers begins a long time ago, a very long time ago. It's about 120 years old, and maybe even older. The NPRC, we know, is looking at periods before that. But what we decided in transitional justice times, that it was possible for us to really look only in transitional justice terms at the period from 1965 onwards. Because 1965 was a massive rupture in the country, and when all sorts of very terrible things began. So that was the period we were talking about in transitional justice. We didn't ignore what came before, but we saw that that was largely of a historical memorialization process in which that history had to be understood and understood very clearly in transitional justice terms, not merely in political economy terms or in ordinary historical terms, but in transitional justice terms. Now, why it's important, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about history, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about the interventions, because we're taking stock. We're taking stock of our history, and we're taking our stock of what we have done with that history. And in many ways, this is a valedictory to Zimbabwean civil society. Now, why is it important? Because transitional justice surveys have shown that we Zimbabweans cut history up in very strange ways. In the big survey that the Forum did, 41% of the sample, of this national sample, it's a very large sample, said they were only interested in any violation that took place after 2000. And I suggest that number's getting bigger as the youth demographic gets bigger. They don't remember previous history. And 71% said they were only interested in anything that happened from 1980. But the country didn't get invented, didn't arrive from space in 1980. It came from somewhere with a history. So look at this history. 1965, illegal regime, a very bitter and brutal war, mass violations. But there was an intervention, a very important intervention at that particular time by the Catholic Commission of Justice and Peace, who began to document the displacements, the torture, the executions that were taking place. And they did that, and they produced two very important publications. But what also happened was in 1975, the Smith government passed the infamous Indemnity and Compensation Act, which basically was a forward-looking statute of impunity. Any soldier, member of the state, was entitled to the defense of impunity if a person was harmed while they were doing this thing. And worse than that, they backdated it to 1972 to cover the cases that the Catholic Commission had already found out, effectively rendering that initiative unable to go to court. And of course, we all know that what came about at the end of that period were formal amnesties, firstly under the British government and then secondly under the new Zimbabwean government. The principle behind that was a principle of reconciliation. It didn't hold for very long because between 82 and 87, mass violations all over again. Again, another intervention by the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace. And even that pressure forcing the government to put in place a commission, the Chiambakwe Commission. And we need to think instructively about the commission that's operating today. That commission's report was never made public, and we know that's a source of great concern in this region and for many human rights workers. And that was also followed by an amnesty. That period was broken by an epoch-making report, the Breaking the Silence report. An exceptionally good report about the violation. Amnesty said it was one of the best human rights reports ever written. And then followed a period of relative peace. But there was violence in the 1990 elections, again in the 1995 elections. And a comment to make here, if you examine the relationship between political violence and elections, Zimbabwe has the ill fortune to be the most violent country in the whole SADC region when it comes to elections. And that's not a badge of honor. But in that period of those violence came about other kinds of forms of impunity with pardons for various people. The big shift that came about in 1998, and it's a big shift in two ways. First, because of the mass violence that took place during the food riots, but also the setting up of a consortium of human rights organizations, the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum, and building on experiences. That grouping went into action, produced a first-class report on those food riots. That report was taken to the Human Rights Committee in New York, and the Human Rights Committee wrote a very unfavorable report about Zimbabwe on the basis of that report. But also what was instituted then, and I will come back to this a little later, was under the forum, Zimbabwean civil society began a highly innovative way in order to deal with the practical impunity. And that was mounting civil suits in defense of the victims. Laborious, expensive, but it was a way of insisting on accountability and truth. 99, some of you may remember the torture of the standard journalists. We have to remember our history, taken away right out of the law and order section and taken away by the army and tortured. But things really hotted up at the end of the millennium with the first election in 2000. And there was considerable violence, and that violence was well documented by Zimbabwean civil society and led to concerns by both the Commonwealth and by the EU, and in the Commonwealth's opinion led to Zimbabwe's suspension from the Council. No, a warning, I'm wrong. They warned Zimbabwe that they might be suspended. And from that period of 2000 onwards was a long period of very violent by-elections leading to the 2002 presidential election. And for the younger people who remember 2008, this was an election that was every bit as violent as 2008. And by that time, civil society was much more organized. So what there was extremely good documentation of the violations that took place, of the by-elections, of the election itself. There was extensive lobbying done by the human rights groups all around the world. Zimbabwe was suspended from the Commonwealth. The EU instituted disciplinary proceedings under the Cotonou agreement and imposed restrictive conditions, and the United States imposed the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act. 2005, there was a relative period of relative peace, one would say. There were violations and they were documented against civil society activists on the streets, NCA, WOZA, people like that. But the 2005 election was considerably less violent, but documented with considerable amount of intimidation. The result of the election led to a very unpredictable occurrence, and that was Operation Murambuchina, which was an enormous invasion into the lives of ordinary people. And what was very important about that event was that a UN envoy was sent in. And Anna Tibajuka made a very, very, very serious report with condemnation. She alleged crimes against humanity. She even raised the issue of the right to protect. But what is less known by people, and I see this in the referencing, is everybody refers to her report, they forget that incredibly good documentation of what happened in Murambuchina was done by Zimbabwean civil society. There are extremely good reports done by ActionAid, by Solidarity Peace Trust, by the Forum. There was corroboration of the UN envoy's approach, and that was very important documentation. 2008 we know about, and that led to the repudiation by the AU of the election, the setting up of the GPA, and out of that grew the 2013 Constitution and the clauses dealing with independent commissions, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission and the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, and a range of other ones. So by the time we get to today, we've been on a very, very long journey. Now the response of civil society is incredibly important. We're taking stock of what has been done. The first thing we've done in civil society is we have documented. My goodness me, we have documented. Any poor student at a liberal arts college who thinks, I'll look at the human rights history of Zimbabwe from 2000 onwards is going to die from the number of reports they have to read. Not domestically, from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, Physicians for Human Rights, IRCT. It is enormous. And I think my colleagues in the NPRC, I dread that they have to read these reports, they will die. But we continued with that documenting, and it got much more sophisticated. Remember, the first documentations, the very important ones, were done under the Catholic Commission in the 70s, and then by the Catholic Commission and the Legal Resources Foundation in the 80s. And they set standards for us, and those standards have been maintained in civil society. So we've documented everything. We've documented Gokorohundi, the food riots, all elections, farm invasions, Murambuchina. We've even documented the shootings recently. So Zimbabwean civil society has a truth-telling instrument of a very powerful kind, and that is the reports that the Zimbabwe Peace Project and all their documentation. There are an enormous range of information about what happens in Zimbabwe. And I suggest that one of those consequences of that, it has an inhibitory effect on the propensity of violence. Not totally, but the state is aware that everything that happens is seen and is reported very widely. The second thing, and I think Zimbabwean civil society can give themselves a big pom-pom on the back, beginning with those civil cases on the food riots, thousands of victims have courageously come to human rights organizations and been willing to go to court to sue the state and their perpetrators for civil damages. And they do that because of the unwillingness to prosecute, the practical impunity that happens with many of those cases. It's time-consuming, it's very expensive, it's extremely courageous, but it holds a window up. Because every time they win one of those cases, a transitional justice point is made. This thing did happen, and it was done to this person by those people. Very important. And the advocacy and lobbying, it's been a stock in trade. We've continually gone to the Human Rights Human Committee, the Human Rights Commission. We've gone to the African Commission for Human and People's Rights. We've gone to SADC in various ways. We've gone to regional governments. And we've tried to use the UN machinery as much as possible. And very innovatively, we have taken, where we cannot get criminal prosecutions within our own country very often, we've gone to foreign jurisdictions. We went to the SADC tribunal, and we're very successful at the SADC tribunal, and probably a reason why all SADC governments looked at it and thought we don't want this tribunal anymore, because Zimbabwe is setting a precedent for what's going to happen. People are going to bring these cases here. We've been endlessly to the African Commission and got very good rulings from the African Commission. And those are very unusual things. Plus, we have also instituted cases in South Africa under the Domesticated Rome Statute. The 2007 torture of Morgan Tsvangirai, Labmo Moduku at that peace march, a case was mounted in South Africa with the Priority Crimes Unit of the South African NPA. Nafunda will tell me if I've got those numbers right. And those cases are still pending and are added to by an amicus brief on the first detailed report that we have, forensic report of politically motivated rape. So, Zimbabwean civil society, there's a long, awful history, but Zimbabwean civil society has stood up and done what is needed. Where we couldn't find a way, we found another way. Where we were blocked, we found another route. But of course, you must remember, this has all happened in what we be defined as a pre-transitional period. And we need a transition. Because if you look at it, successful transitional justice does require a transition, does require a change. And very interestingly, I've written this down, and you will see at the back of the paper I appended the 2003 recommendations. And what's fascinating about those things is the recommendations we made then are as true today as they were 15 years ago. But, unlike 2003, we now have a constitution, and we now have independent commissions, and we have the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. I think a quick summary of his presentation. I think he's actually making a point to say that we have to understand our history in the context of TJ. And he has also shared with us the effects of organized violence and torture, its multiplicity in terms of having it being transgenerational, the fact that we can deal with it today doesn't necessarily mean that trauma has been dealt with. Trauma lives on and it can be inherited over generations. He has also shared with us, I think, the various episodes of violence that we have experienced as a nation, starting from the colonial era. And I think from his argument, we can actually conclude to say that these violations were gross, systematic, widespread, and also the effect of formal amnesties that have also accompanied such kind of episodes of violence, as he has detailed. He has also shared with us the responses that CSOs have made, the various interventions ranging from the formation of consortiums to have concerted efforts around challenging the impunity, which is quite pervasive even up to date, as he has alluded to the recent events of the August 1 violations. The work around documentation, which is quite extensive and has helped in terms of building up a truth-telling process from a civil society perspective, and its effect in inhibiting the propensity of violence. The fact that the state knows that even if it commits violations today, it's watched. I think to a certain extent it mitigates the impact. You can imagine if there were not these interventions, where we would be to today. And he has also alluded to efforts around advocacy and lobbying, which has gone beyond national to also engage international frameworks in terms of raising awareness on human rights violations that we're obtaining in the country. I think it's basically making a case to say that this is a discourse that we have to continue. We started off 15 years ago, and still to date, most of the recommendations that were made at the 2003 symposium and the subsequent other platforms that we have engaged in a civil society have not been met, and there is need for us to continue with the conversations. I'll quickly move on to the NPRC presentation before I invite Otto to come forward. I don't know how you are going to structure your presentation. I'll give you 10 minutes each, since it's the two of you, or you have done your own. Okay, so I think you will advise us on who is starting first. Okay, over to you, Commissioner. Okay. I think I need help with technology. The thing.
I thought I was the only one born before computers.
While she's preparing, I just have a housekeeping announcement. I think we just need your assistance. One of our participants, Commissioner Chiriseri, is missing her iPhone S7. Oh, you got it? Ah, we thank God. Okay. And also, I think as we are having our conversations, I'm sure you've seen some little gadgets, some little toys in front of you. They are not toys. They are for translations. So we want to encourage an inclusive and participatory interaction. So you feel free to speak in a language that is comfortable or convenient to you. We have translation, so that gadget is for translation. You kindly switch it on gently. And if you want to link up to Shona, it's on channel 3, and Ndebele is on channel, English is channel 1, and Ndebele is channel 3. There's no Shona channel, I suppose. Okay. So over to you, Commissioner. And please remember to leave them behind when you leave the room.
Let's take some. One seat.
Oh yeah.
Good morning. Let me say all protocol observed. We have such little time to say what we went through in 2 years. And it might not be possible to say everything that I need to say, because there's just so much to say. Let me say this presentation was prepared by Commissioner Leslie and myself, and so he will say the last part of the presentation. Let me acknowledge the survivors and remember the survivors of violence as we present and as we go through the peace building process. The journey that the National Peace and Reconciliation took was a long one, was a hard one, was a tedious one. We needed to have shock absorbers. Commissioner was appointed 2015. We were sworn in 2016. We immediately embarked on capacity building because we did not have a bill. We did not have an enabling legislation to enable us to go and discuss and engage stakeholders. And so what we could only do was to do capacity enhancement. And it was a blessing in disguise, because we had been trained differently with different backgrounds. We were coming from 9 different disciplines, and we had to find out each other in terms of saying, how do we execute the mandate? And so between 2016 and 2017, we engaged in massive capacity building exercise, just to understand, just to unpack the mandate, just to understand some of the critical things that took place. And January 5 is when the enabling legislation was passed through, and we did a press conference, and we did provincial consultations, and we immediately, actually between 2015 and 2018, we were doing an incremental strategic planning process that we then launched last week in Harare. We were guided by the legal framework, Chapter 12, that established the NPRC 251, the composition 252, the mandate, and some of the critical things. The mandate is expansive, which is a blessing and a disguise at the same time. We are expected to deal with post-conflict justice, and we will deal with post-conflict justice, healing and reconciliation. We will deal with issues of healing, unity and cohesion in the country, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. That's part of the mandate. We will do truth-telling, as my chairperson has already alluded to. That truth-telling will form a fundamental pillar, and it is function number 3 in our mandate. We will do making of amends, provision of justice, whether it's retributive justice, restorative justice, would have to look at that. We'll look at and facilitate dialogue across political parties, groups, communities, organizations, in order to prevent future conflicts from happening. And we really appreciate and we adore the never again approach to it. And we also, in our mandate, is the issue of rehabilitation treatments and support of survivors of conflicts. and I'll talk more about it. And there will be complaints handling, early detection of potential conflicts, conciliation and mediation, making recommendations. A lot of people have said 10 years is not enough. What are you going to do? There's a provision to make recommendations. We can say there can be another group of people and put the modalities in place in order to institutionalize peace and reconciliation. And to do anything incidental. Anything. You can do anything incidental. And so that's, in summary, the mandate of the Commission. But we also had to put in place the guiding principles, because we needed principles to guide us as we envision the whole process, as we dealt with the how part of how we are going to implement the mandate. And so we said we needed a vision which is a desired image of the future, a vision that illustrates the reason for the plans. And so we said the vision is to build a Zimbabwe that is peaceful for all generations. And we really mark the issue of generations, as I will talk about the conflicts that we've analyzed. We did a conflict map from 11th century Mapungubwe to date, which shows the issue of generational aspects, which is very key. And a lot of people have really questioned to say, if you are going to start Mapungubwe, when are you going to come to 2005? Or when are you going to come to 1983? But you will see a pattern as I present, that there is a pattern, a systematic pattern that emerges from the initiation of the nation state to date. You will see the same conflicts coming up, the same cycle of violence coming up, the same attributes, the same drivers of conflicts coming up. And so that is very important, because if you are to resolve a conflict and you start resolving a conflict midway, you are likely to create more conflicts. So it is better to have a comprehensive, a holistic approach that encompasses the conflict from the initial stage to the end. Sorry, the Commission is in trouble when I speak. I move away from the mic all the time. And we looked at the vision. We said we need a vision that drives our purpose, which is the primary reason why we are going to have this, to implement the mandate. And our mission was to unite Zimbabweans for peace by developing mechanisms to resolve conflicts of the past and institute approaches to prevent. You will see this vision as a component of dealing with the past. It is a component of dealing with unfolding current conflicts, and it is a component of dealing with the future. And so it is three-pronged in nature, and that's why we put that vision. And we are saying we are not going to implement this mission without values. We needed values. We're not going to do it at whatever cost. And so we put in place the issue of confidentiality. I've looked at our constitution, our enabling legislation, and we said confidentiality is key, so that there is trust, there is respect, there is protection of the victims and survivors, there is dignity, recognition of information. So the issue of confidentiality emanates, it starts from the time when the victim, the survivor, walks in, that the survivor is protected right round until the conflict is resolved. And we looked at the issue of inclusivity, and we realized that Zimbabwe, given our history and the conflict map, that we are a divided nation, and that we have been divided from 11th century Mapungubwe, from the pre-colonial Zimbabwe. We have been a divided nation, and therefore this is an opportunity for Zimbabweans to build an inclusive society. And we say everybody has got to be included in terms of gender, in terms of regions, in terms of educational backgrounds, in terms of class, in terms of all those other diversities. Because diversities are supposed to make us more beautiful, diversities are supposed to build us together and complement each other rather than divide us. And so we said inclusivity is important. And we said we will uphold another value of Ubuntu, the African spirit of togetherness, the virtues, passion, humanity, which is very critical, realizing that we are Africans. And we also put the issue of transparency. We said we are going to be open as a commission. We are going to be honest as a commission. We are going to be accountable as a commission. Hence, when we did the strategic planning process, when the act was passed, we started to invite others. Even I think at one point we were clandestinely inviting before the act. just to get the view, just to understand from stakeholders, to say what is going on, how should we approach this, what is your perception. Sectoral leaders were able to do that, and so we did that. And lastly, most of all, we said we're going to be victim-centered. And as I have said, providing support, opportunities, empowering engagement of participants in the whole process. We were able to do the provincial meetings only, but now because the strategic plan is out, we are now going into the rural areas. We are now going into the communities. We are now going to go to where the people are. And so we took a six-pronged approach. A lot of people were saying, where is your strategic plan? How come the NPRC doesn't have a strategic plan? Because the issues of peace and reconciliation involve the body, soul, and spirit. It's not something that you can sit down behind a table and craft and then shove it down people's throats. No, you have got to involve the people so that they can own the process. You have got to consult the people so that they can feel part of the process, so that they can support you. You have got to negotiate sometimes with the people. And so we did a six-pronged approach. We did skills development. We looked at ourselves. We looked at our competencies. Who can do what? While we are waiting for the act, we did 16 organizational policies that have been adopted to date. Fortunately, because the commission is different skills, we're able to do it without any resources. But we're also grateful to UNDP, who were able to support us during the process. And we did conceptualizing and understanding of the mandate. Just to understand, for example, what is truth. I remember we spent 4 days discussing what is truth. Whose truth is it? Is truth moral? Is truth legal? Is truth hermeneutical? Is truth social? And does it need witnesses? And so we were able to interrogate those issues in order to come to an understanding. So when you hear one commissioner speaking here, the same commissioner will speak the same language wherever they are, because we took time to conceptualize and to understand and to come to a common understanding. We did a contextual analysis and environmental analysis and scenario planning, because we realized that we are operating in an environment. We're in a certain political and economic environment. And it is very important for us to understand, to appreciate the dynamics. We did SWOT analysis. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? We did an external environmental assessment. What are the opportunities? What are the threats? What is the flight plan? What is the mitigation plan? And we did scenario planning. Suppose this happens, what do we do? Suppose this happens, what do we do? And we were able to move forward. We did comparative learning from other countries. We remember John came from Sierra Leone, and there's another brother from there. There was a sister Tekla from Kenya. She has been working with us since. We had a group of people coming from South Africa, from Ghana, and we were able to learn and share experiences on best practices and worst practices. And we did a literature review, and I'll talk about the conflict map later. And we did consultations and so forth. So the conflict map, let me take you to the conflict map. My brother Tony has already elaborately talked about the conflict map. We were able to engage other people as small groups, as I've said, because we didn't have an egg, so we could not open it. So it's going to be on our website. We finalized it to be a living document. So anybody who feels that there is a conflict that needs to go in, because this is part of our history, is free to write, is free to come, we meet, is free to call us, so that we can have a shared narrative. And I like the historical background, because it has many narratives, as you can see. So for me to be going through there, it is only a drop in the ocean. There's so many narratives to conflicts in Zimbabwe. And as a commission, we want to leave a legacy of having appreciated and written the narratives that Zimbabweans will put through. Not because necessarily that people will come to an agreement about a certain narrative, but just to say, this group of people feel this is how this conflict panned out. This group of people feels that this will pan out. So you will see that the colonial early ethnic conflicts, you will see the ethnic conflict there, conflicts over resources, over land, over cattle, gender-based conflicts in that period, in the pre-colonial history. Then you will see the colonial history. You will see the British South African Company, Land Husbandry Act, Land Apportionment Act, and then you will see a corresponding resistance from African nationalists forming the ANC 1957, the NDP 1960, and you will see the effects of colonialism today. You will feel the effects of Cecil John Rhodes today because of the conquest of the bourgeoisie capitalistic adventures that was embraced by Britain and Cecil John Rhodes in South Africa. You will see today, we are now talking about, the newspapers are talking about an oligarchy, isn't it? Yeah. A group of business people, white and black, who are pretty much acting like the Guptas in South Africa, my sister. And so you will say, and then we read and now say, oh, okay, so they've been there since Rhodesia Front. So they've been there since Ian Smith, and they've been working behind the scenes. And so you will see that this is very important, that a holistic approach to this thing will work because you are looking at the picture in a holistic fashion. And so you will also see the party politics playing out. The issue, the formation of ZANU, very, very violent issues taking place with the formation of ZANU, with the response by ZAPU, with ZANU counter-responding to ZAPU, and you will see culminating in a split of 1963. And the split, another violent conflict that today we feel about it. You know, when you go to these offices, say, oh, that one, you see what happened. This one, during the split, ran away. Yeah, you remember that one that I'm talking about. During the split, he did this and he sold out, and the manifestation, the effects are felt today. And so you have also ethnic politics coming in here. You will ethnic politics, ZAPU, predominantly Ndebele, ZANU, predominantly Shona, Ndonga, predominantly Ndau. And these things have never been resolved. These issues, sometimes we sweep them under the carpet, sometimes we ignore them. Sometimes the role of Britain in the formation of Super ZAPU, for instance, and nobody has ever interrogated that. So it is an opportunity for us to go into detail, to look at every conflict so that we can resolve it. And so the Nyazonya attack, the UN sanctions, the attempt to bring peace and reconciliation through 1971 settlement proposals. And you see the period 1972 to 1979. That's when the war then escalated. The escalation of the war. And you see more both inter-party and intra-party violence. Hence you see Naribaza rebellion, you see the Chitepo assassination, you see the battles and so forth, Chimoy, ethnic tensions, Zipa, the dismantling of Zipa, causing a lot of tension, causing a lot of conflict. And hence these issues emanate from before. And post-independence, you see then, it's a culmination of all those factors. So if we just look at post-independence and try and look at Gukurahundi only, without understanding its genesis, without understanding the political tensions across political party, within political party, across regions, we will not be able to understand Gukurahundi. But if we go back and say all those conflicts and we trace them, and here we are now seeing the assembly point conflicts. Assembly point conflicts, there is no disarmament, there is no demobilization, there is no dialogue, there is no reconciliation. People are still armed. They are sent to assembly points. One in Chitungwiza was 2 kilometers away. And what do you expect? Then that happens. Inter-party escalates. They now assembly point conflicts. Chitungwiza, Ntumbani, Konmara, Chinoi. You find all these conflicts now escalating. 49 wagons are found, accusations, counter-accusations, denials, violent responses, cabinet reshuffle, 1982 arms cache, seizing of property. You then find Gukurahundi. So it is very important that if we take a holistic approach, and this is the approach that we are taking as a commission, to say we have got to understand, and if there is anything, as I've said, missing, we need to build into it, to say, commission, come, sit down, let us share this conflict. Commission, come, let me give you this paper. Commission, come, this group of people feels this narrative should be put in place. And that's why, and then we have a unity accord that is elite pact, strategic apex in nature, that did not involve the people. And then the 90s, I think I will not go into the 90s because my brother has really gone into the 90s and really outlined everything, Murambachina, and 2018 is a culmination of all these conflicts. Elections conflicts is there, leadership conflicts was there, is still there, economic conflict was there, still there, political conflict was there, still there, conflicts over resources, class conflict even, those who have and those who don't have. And so we have a long history of structural violence. Because it is a structure, political party is a structure, government is a structure, and so there's this long history, was then confirmed during the provincial consultations. The provincial consultations, people said yes, they confirmed all those without them even knowing that we had done a conflict map, but also asserting that what we had found during the literature review was correct. But there is hope for the future. I think this is an opportunity for Zimbabwe to move forward. It is a time for Zimbabwe to face it. I don't think there will be another opportunity. It's not the best arrangement. The act might not be what we want. The constitutional provisions might not be what we want. The commissioners might not be who passed, might not be the ones we wanted to pass. But I think this is an opportunity where Zimbabweans can say, let's use what is there. Let's move forward. We have resolved statutory instruments for Guatemala, for Mali, for Benin, for all these other countries. We never came across a perfect one. And so we're possibly saying, why possibly we continue to push the policymakers to improve the documents? Let's deal with what is there. You want a seat? You want a seat? Please give her a seat. Okay, I'm jumping other things. So we did, during the elections, I think it's important for the House to know. Unfortunately, the work of the Commission cannot be publicized. We are like, not like NGO Forum, we say, we condemn in the strongest terms, and we recognize that this is... Yeah, National Commission, we came to that realization that we would have to think differently and to act differently and to engage differently. And I think it is working. It will not work overnight. Possibly the entire period, we will continue to do that, but I think there is some headway. We did an early warning, early response before the 2018 elections. We had to work with key stakeholders because we didn't have resources. And we were getting information from civil society organizations. We did a conflict risk analysis that we also informed our stakeholders that this was likely to happen. We convened the high-level dialogue with the strategic apex of government, with intelligence, with the military, with the strategic apex of the political parties, and so forth. Then we did the peace pledge. I think most of you were privy to it. Where 21 out of 23 presidential candidates came to commit themselves, and we did the peace caravan. Each commissioner, the commissioner will talk about it, as a province was assigned to a province, and at one point in Chinoi, there were so many people, and so I had to stand in a moving caravan. You know, they self-pick a box. I really pretty much felt like that. And shouting that this is Commissioner Choice Ndoro, my phone number is this, the mandate is this. We want to have peaceful elections. And all the commissioners did that in the 10 provinces. And we also did the provincial peace pledges. We took the peace pledge from the national to the provincial, and we now have a peace monitoring report. Post-election violence, we worked like dogs. We did something. A lot of people are saying, why didn't we worked? We were sleeping around 1 o'clock almost every day, working behind it. We were engaging, we were persuading, we were threatening sometimes, though we didn't have. And so a lot of work has happened. So basically, this is what we this is what we have been doing. So we have provincial representation. My chair, Justice Elonari, and Commissioner Ngu. Because we also had to take into cognizance the cultural dynamics, the traditional beliefs. Because we don't take a person then who doesn't know anything about the region. So they're responsible, Mat North, Mat South, and Blowai. Deputy Chair Chigwedere Harare, Chada Mash East, Musanu Midlands, Chiradza Manicaland, Chekenyere Mashingo, Masunungure Mash Central, and I'm in Mash West. And we also have external committees where now I think we came across 616 organizations that are directly and indirectly related or that do the work of peace building. And now we're able to do primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders, ancillary stakeholders, and it was not easy. And so we now have 4 committees: victim support, gender and diversity. This one is going to look at the victims, the issues of birth certificate, death certificate, and so forth. Victim support, it's headed by Commissioner Msano. Prevention and recurrence, headed by Chiradza. He will do the early warning, early response issues, healing and reconciliation. Ubaba here is going to be doing those issues of dialogue facilitation, and he has already started. Research and knowledge management, I heard that. And so you will see that healing and reconciliation, truth seeking, truth telling, it's not only about truth telling, but it's also how do you seek the truth to those who are not able to come forward to say the truth. So we'll not only be doing truth telling, but also truth seek public hearings, complaints handling, investigations, research, nation cohesion building, narratives. Non-recurrence will deal with the architecture for conflict prevention, risk model, confidence building, victim support, assistance, rehab, treatment of survivors, knowledge management. We'll do inquiry into investigations, hypothesis, interpretations of data. It looks educated. Acquisition, storage, knowledge management then does archiving, acquisition, storage, distribution, and also distribution because we need to tell the stakeholders. And of course, there are internal committees and their departments and the challenges. And the challenges is an expansive mandate. Huge mandate to deal with post from 11 it's not easy. From past, present, future. So why do we looking at the past to say then 1 August happens? And you put everything down and they're running with 1 August. Now we're supposed to be running with intra-party issues again. And so it's not easy. Expansive, raise the expectations. Everybody wants to be heard. If you are hurt, if you are bleeding, if nobody has given you an opportunity for 37 years, you want to be heard. It's a natural phenomenon. Yet South Africa, with $18 million a year for 2.5 years, was able to do how many? 20,000 statements only. And so the reality and the expectations, we are really grappling with it. Political environment, possible scenarios that may emerge. Funding, admin support, we still don't have funding. Trust deficit, we are like a baby. We are like a baby that comes with the mother. Because we are not trusted by the executive, we are not trusted by civil society, we are not trusted by the church, and you are like they're trying to say, no, I'm very genuine, you know, and so these issues of trust. So trust is built, trust is earned. If we are able to demonstrate that we are trustworthy, then I take it the stakeholders will trust us. A risk of national promise versus a half. Opportunities improved. Now there's an improvement. To tell you the truth, there's now an improvement in the political will for the commission to work, unlike before. We think the conflict. Everybody is most people are ready. They are ripe to have this thing ready. We also have very good will from civil society. They have worked with us. The church have worked with us. When we didn't have a penny to our name, they were able to bring us to some areas, to be able to do some things, and we are very grateful to our state actors. Now that the legislation is there and it allows us to do everything. Imagine if we were able to, if they were able only say you can only do from 2010, it was going to pose problems when you know the roots of the conflict are in the previous epoch. And so, yeah. Peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You will agree with me. This was a very difficult agenda to manage. But because she's a commissioner of peace, I'll maintain my peace. Thank you very much. Quite an elaborate and extensive presentation. I will not attempt to summarize because we are doing very, very bad on time. We have agreed that Commissioner Ngube will come in during the plenary with his remarks. So now I'll quickly invite Otto to come forward to make a case on why we need, I think you can remain there because we are going to engage with
Otto will attack us.
I know you want, I'll stand in between so that at least I become the buffer zone, don't worry. Yeah, so he is going to make a case as to why we need this comprehensive transitional justice policy. Otto, I had a set of questions I needed to pose to you, but I see you are already ready and ready to go. If I then don't get them addressed, I'll come back and put them to you. But over to you, and then we'll open up for discussion.
Thanks, Blessing, and good afternoon, everyone. As the day progresses, it appears that we are all, the energy levels are going down, and I think the space is not making it any easier. So I'll try to make it easier for you by going straight into some of my reflections. These are reflections, are not meant to confine you or anyone to a particular line of thinking or reasoning, but are intended to give us some thoughts to reflect around in respect of the need for a transitional justice policy for Zimbabwe. So as I was coming to the venue, I passed by a hospital, and I was with my brother Ambuso Fuzwayo, and the hospital is named after Father Joshua Nkabukon Ngomo, and yes, the click doesn't come out very well. So I asked when this was going to be opened, and he said there was a promise that it would be opened, after the elections. I had so many questions, which I still have, around how we commemorate and celebrate key individuals and key contributors to the history of our country. Some say that Zimbabwe is not ready for transitional justice. They say that there has to be a break with the past. There is a new government, some say it's not very new. And therefore, there are persons around the extent to which you can talk of transitional justice. But the earlier presenters have already said that, we're in a process. Healing is a process, it's not an event. And therefore, we might have to talk about transitional justice. And many a times when someone reaches out to reconcile with you or with another person, it might be perceived as an affirmation of who has power and who doesn't have power. So there are power dynamics and power issues at play when we talk about transitional justice. It has been said already that the journey has been, has been difficult. And every time that I listen to or am part of these gatherings, I hear history being rewritten over and over. So I live more confused about which narrative is the actual narrative, because everyone seems to have his or her own narrative. I think that's part of dealing with the past, because how you experienced it, how you saw it, might be completely different. It's important to celebrate the work of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. I think we take note of what they've done. But there definitely are ways which their work could be made a bit easier or could be enhanced. And as Commissioner Ndoro was talking about the timeline, one thing that came to mind is that it's very difficult to prescribe a timeline for healing. You cannot say in 10 years you will be healed or you would have reconciled. It sounds so mechanical and so formulaic to the extent that it might not make sense. And looking at the area of countries that have gone through similar processes, I've noticed that time and again they've extended the mandates of those commissions because they realized that their initial timeline was not sufficient. But it's not about timelines. It's about dealing with the culture. It's about dealing with the practice. And that's why I'm of the view that actually we need to have a transitional justice policy. The NPRC Act is the product of the Constitution. And it's not necessarily a transitional justice policy. Why do we need a policy? It's clearly that it's a statement of intent, and that statement of intent should be supported by practical actions on the ground. And these actions are not supposed to be confined to time and space, but ideally should be part of the whole of government and society approach. Therefore, the work of the commissions under Chapter 12 or the NPRC then becomes just part of the work. I'll give examples on why I'm saying so. First, we said transitional justice is not an event, it's a journey. And the question is, do we have facilities that allow for the continued provision of support for those that require such services? There are several violations that have occurred, and some are continuing, which have not been dealt with, and these continue to open wounds and not bring any form of closure or coping. For argument's sake, if these cases require prosecution, we need to have clarity on how those prosecutions will take place. Is it going to be a referral from the NPRC to the Prosecutor General? Is there going to be a specific department within the Prosecutor General that is going to deal with past crimes? Is it going to be another special unit prosecuting corruption officers in the President's office? We need clarity. And that clarity can only stem if there's a clear policy statement of intent, which right now we do not necessarily have. Of course, the Commission has got room to come up with regulations, to come up with directives, but I contend that these will not be sufficient. If we are to, as an example, resolve the issues of disappearances and murders that took place, let's say around Bukraund, there's going to be need for forensic expertise. Identification of mass graves. Of course, communities know where mass graves are. But again, the question is their truth sufficient? Because already it has been doubted in our history, though we know several places where people were buried in mass graves. This shouldn't be an afterthought. So the policy should clearly state what steps and procedures will be undertaken and who is responsible for that. Justice means many things and different things to everyone. If we were to say what it means right now in this room, I don't think we'll come up with an agreement. We might even have more definitions than the people are in the room knowing Zimbabweans. Therefore, it's necessary for us to make some hard choices, and they would have to be made, those hard choices. But again, they should be informed by particular principles. Place the victims at the center, survivors at the center, but also equally recognizing that perpetrators, whether alleged or confirmed, should be given an opportunity to rehabilitate themselves back into society. I think this is always very difficult, but we have to talk about it. But when we talk of rehabilitation as an example, which is one of the mandates that the Commission has, do they have facilities to provide rehabilitation? So are they going to walk into the Ministry of Labour and Social Welfare and say, we have just come from consultations in Bulawayo over the weekend and we've got 100 people who need support insofar as mental, psychosocial care is concerned. Can you accommodate them? What would be the response from the Ministry of Social, Labour, Health, whatever it might be? They'll probably say, we have no room for them. And what are they doing here? Why did you bring them here? Right? Because it's not a whole of government approach. Right? So therefore it means that departments such as the social welfare, they should be prepared to provide services when we're talking about national healing and reconciliation, because they have a role to play. But not only those departments, but other civil society actors should be equally prepared. Some individuals who played a critical part in making of this nation, some say it's not a nation. That's again another argument. Are not given the same level of celebration and reverence as others. I know of one, senior Zipra veteran, I think, who's buried at Stanley Cemetery, who ordinarily would have qualified to be at the Yeroseka, right? There are monuments that have been built in the country and outside the country. There are monuments in Nyadzonya, Chimoyo. But there are no similar monuments in Balago, as an example. Right? People were thrown in caves in Slovela, in the Gwanda areas, mass graves. There is no formal recognition that those burial sites exist. Why am I raising this? The responsible ministry, Home Affairs, local public service, whatever you might call it, should be part of this conversation, because they are ordinarily and statutorily mandated with designation of those points. Right? So they should be in this conversation. But they might not necessarily be in the NPRC Act, but a policy would cover and include them. During the tea break, I was overhearing a conversation between, again, two friends that I had not seen in a while, striking counsel with Zipra and Huso, and they were talking about the debates around registration of births and deaths of people who are affected by Gukraund. There are families up to now who have not been able to identify, to obtain those documents, who are struggling, right? Because there's no decision on what caused the death. There's dispute. A bullet wound is described as a blunt object. Or multiple injuries. Arson attacks are recorded as accidental fire. There was no medical doctor to certify that the cause of death. But there were mothers and sisters and brothers and neighbors who watched as these events unfolded. But their word is not sufficient. Therefore, ministries should be clearly directed on how to act and not to sweep these under the carpet. And by acting, you are actually offering an acknowledgement and apology. We know that your father was shot to death. So the death certificate says gunshot wounds or injuries, not multiple attacks or beatings or something of that sort. Right. That level of acknowledgement is critical and is important. This means it becomes the whole of government approach. Thankfully, if I'm allowed to do this, it sounds very unprofessional, but I think the moving of Tobayom Day was a bit of a relief, but it doesn't deal with the structural issues. Because the structural issues and the system still remains the way it was. Right. So we need to go to the root causes of some of these issues. So when we say we are giving birth certificate, we are giving death certificate, does the registrar or a representative of the registrar, somewhere in the back of beyond, will be able to identify with that directive to say, now you are supposed to give birth certificates to individuals who are now even over 30 years. No birth certificate because they couldn't give the ID of the father or the mother, which is required. Right? Or a statement from the chief could not depose that I know that he or she was born here and the parents are now late. Right. So this is the continuity of some of these issues. Dealing with the past is expensive, as is dealing with the future. So there's need for resources, financial resources. I think the Minister of Finance is supposed to be reading a budget statement. I'm not so sure is it today or tomorrow. Tomorrow. And it would be interesting to see how much will be channeled for commissions. It would be interesting to see how much will be channeled for the NPRC and all of those. I know there are pressing needs in the country, but my argument is that those pressing needs are unlikely to be solved if the past is not spoken about, the truth is not dealt with, because we are going in circles and running away from our past. So we'll never be cohesive because we have not dealt with the past. In short, the Ministry of Finance should be aware of the need for healing, memories, and reconciliation in their yearly budget statements. We should see commitment, right? But it might not necessarily be because of the NPRC Act. Of course, they'll make allocations, but they also have to make allocations for other government departments to help in the implementation of the NPRC mandate, which is why, as Commissioner Ndoro is saying. We are very quick to talk of political violations, which is important. But we've also had a series of economic violations. And this economic impunity, it dates way back to pre-colonial times, supported by political instruments. It was carried over into post-independent Zimbabwe and continues today. So, one might choose to stay the first port of call with the Reserve Bank and say they enabled violence or supported violence. One might go even to private companies, business communities in this country. Some big corporates who have been named for actually fueling violence since time immemorial. They also have to be part of this conversation around the policy, because the way that they've conducted themselves, in short, one would call them conflict entrepreneurs. They thrive on other people's pain, and they make profits out of our pain. Right? So outside this framework, they have to be included somehow. The policy is not intended for government arms or state institutions only. But it should be a guiding framework for how we relate to one another. It should equally inform how civil society, churches, businesses conduct themselves in respect of creating and building a society that says never again we're going to repeat, violence. So the case for a policy is not to displace the NPRC. I think you need to hear me well on this one. It's actually to enable the work of the NPRC and to have a very holistic approach towards transitional justice, and to realize that some things that we want done might fall outside the ability of the NPRC, might fall out into the mandate of other ministries and other departments. A good example is, when Jeremy will talk about security sector reform as an example. There are issues that has to be dealt with within the security sector. But I am not so sure who among the commissioners will be willing to face the generals. Again, they'll face them 3 times, so they'll go for the 4th time. But it's important to realize that there's need for a framework and a policy that speaks to that, and the need for institutional reforms, and the need for a government-wide approach to transitional justice. That's why we're saying there's need for a policy. And it goes beyond the 10 years, but it becomes part and parcel of our culture and of our experiences as a people. I think I've made my case, realizing that there isn't enough time to go through the entire paper. Thank you.
You can take a seat there. Yeah, part of my questions, you have addressed them. I was going to ask you, after hearing from Commissioner Ndoro, the elaborate mandate that the NPRC has been given and how they've interpreted that mandate in their strategic plan. I was going to ask you, what's the rationale of having a policy? Could that not be sufficient enough? And I think you have tried to address that, but I'm sure more questions will come in the plenary. And also the aspect of, I mean, listening to the presentations from Tony, Commissioner Ndoro, and part of the issues that you have raised also, the reason why it has taken us so long to come up with an approach that would ensure a never again. I know you have touched on the aspects of, you know, whether or not we are in transition, and the fact that I think whether we are seeing some changes in terms of the environment. I'm sure all of the presenters have spoken with that. Could it be the reason why? But we also noticed from the history that was outlined that there have been some efforts. The Commission of Inquiry is not a new phenomenon. It has been with us in most of these episodes, and we know what that has happened. Right now we are confronted with the currently ongoing. Why has it taken us this long to come to a never again? And what is it that we need to come to a never again kind of situation as we are focusing on in this conference? So with that, I will let us engage and interact with the presenters. It's unfortunate that I don't have a lot of time on my side. We have just done a slight change in our program. As you have noticed, I was supposed to be one of the presenters, but knowing Otto very well, I knew he was going to adequately cover most of the issues. So we will engage and interact in the plenary. And also, we were supposed to break at 1 for lunch. But the conversations were stimulating. We couldn't, you know, cut them short for our benefit. So I would seek your indulgence there that we break for 1:30. We have arranged with the organizers of the conference, and they are okay with it, so that we have more time to engage and interact. As I'm talking, I'm expecting hands or indications around questions, areas of clarifications. And if you could also kindly introduce yourself, where you are coming from, because we have a lot of stakeholders representing various sectors participating in the conference. And also if you have a specific question to a specific presenter, knowing very well that we have 2 commissioners here, Commissioner Leslie Nwewe will make remarks during plenary, just direct them to the specific presenter as you would want your responses addressed. I notice my brother over there, and Mr. Nyati, MP Gonese. If I can take 5. One more, okay, over there, in that order.
Thank you, Madam MC. I'll be following my paper so that I don't digress and waste your time. I'm striking Kandla, the Secretary General of ZAPU. Now, the first thing I wanted to point out is that I was quite impressed by Reverend Moses' observation that we shouldn't be imprisoned by the past. So for that to happen, we must know our past. That's the number 1. And that's why I think Commissioner Ndoro's presentation, unfortunately, was truncated because of lack of time. It's quite important. The starting points and the highlights of the periods of conflict and how they fit into the history of the colonial state, which is the Zimbabwean state I asked you to end, because we are in the boundaries set up by the 1884 Berlin Conference. So the boundaries and the continuity of that state is very important, including the culture of repression from the colonial state to the post-independence state, including elements of law. And I think that maybe we need another session altogether to see the inheritance from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe and how that has affected the way we do business in terms of law and justice. Now, Commissioner Ndoro also mentioned the importance of trust, which is important. And trust, I heard from the South Africans this week, is built slowly like a coconut tree grows, but it grows fast like a coconut fruit. So I think that is quite important insofar as retention of trust is concerned amongst institutions. May I add, quite uncharacteristically today, I'm in a nice mood, but I wanted to just say that there is a transitional justice industry which is perpetuating itself and not really sufficiently taking note of those who ought to be involved, but rather looking inside. I had to get crushed to get here, and Justice Commissioner Ndoro will be pleased to know that we met a group of 20 people I managed to come. Here, with over 50, I had to struggle to get in here. And I think that is quite indicative. Seeing that we're the only political party that has thousands of officials killed during Bukurawu, and also with properties that were seized on false premises and they have yet to be retained. The same applies to the zebra properties. Some people have died poor, but we put aside their own money from the exercise when the armies were being integrated and some were not joining them. But that's a long story. Today, let us say that I am impressed that we are dealing with issues of justice and how to make it happen. Processes that must actual perpetrators from justice. There is so much talking and very little translation of that into practice. When I joined the struggle as a very young person, I've lost my hair, apart from other indicators. But now I'm getting old and getting impatient. Getting to 70 and seeing things that I fought against as a young person being perpetrated today is something that I never anticipated. And I think that, by the way, I was in Kenya when the Rwandan genocide happened in 1994, and I saw the RPF going to fight. I was in Addis Ababa when Kenya was engulfed in election violence, and I've seen them go into a reconciliation process. We are very good at intellectualizing, and I think Paul was very important here. When he said that we have a lot of expertise, our expertise is in danger of dulling our impatience about injustice. We are so much at intellectualizing what happens. I hope that from here we can move faster so that what we've been talking about for over 30 years can become reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mkanda. I'm sure panelists will take note of some of the comments. I saw a hand here. Do we have one roving mic? Just, yeah, okay. All right. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Patisa Nyati. I want to submit that conflict requires initial input of energy and resources. Requires both energy and resources to sustain. See, this I think I'm saying after hearing Saki. He is right. There are people who are violence entrepreneurs. That we have to understand. And this is precisely what I'm saying in the book that I've just published. There are people, I didn't use this term, but I like it. I've said there are people who fish in troubled waters. Wherever there is conflict, some people benefit. Make no mistake about that. When it was announced, Nzarabani certainly has got petroleum, it may spell doom to Zimbabwe. If you look, you do some mapping of Africa and say, where is violence taking place? Sustained violence and conflict, political conflict. Nigeria, Boko Haram, somewhere Sudan. But you then say, look under the feet of the people in those areas. There are resources. There are. It's very clear. Certainly there's been discovered useful resources in the northern part of Mozambique. And already we hear there are people moving in to cause conflict. Conflict benefits some people. Let's be clear about that one. If it didn't benefit some people, there would be no resources channeled to it to sustain it. Violence generally is sustained, and there are people who benefit. There are entrepreneurs who benefit. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nyati. Just over there, yeah, you can come. Yes. Oh, okay, all right. Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll start by introducing myself. Innocent Gonese. think I've been the Member of Parliament for the last 100 years or so. I want to begin really by complimenting the panelists, the presenters. I think that their presentations really were excellent, and it was really a job well done. I think it really sets us on the right trajectory when we are trying to deal with these issues. It also dovetails with my experiences as a legislator. I was fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be part of the Justice Committee, which tried to conduct public hearings when we had the original NPRC bill. And the experiences that I went through as we moved around clearly showed us that at times, we've got high levels of intolerance. But taking a leaf from what my colleague has just said, it was also clear that some of it is actually fueled by other people. For those who are in Kopak, you understand where I'm coming from. Was you had a situation where the people who would be coming to participate would then have been influenced to behave in a certain manner or to say certain things by others. And that is what I also experienced during the course of the public hearings that we tried, or at least that we did. And in Marondera, it was really particularly bad. But the long and short of it is that we now have to find a way of really dealing with this situation. And one of the questions which I have to the presenters relates to the issue of the time frame. Was we find that unlike other commissions, this is the only one which has got a sunset clause. And when you look at the history, you find that after adopting the new constitution in 2013, it's only in 2018 that the act was actually signed into law. And in the intervening period, you find that the commission was not really able to effectively carry out its mandate. I think this is one of the issues we have been debating also in Parliament as to what we should do about, because there have been various interpretations. Obviously, the most common one is that the sunset clause means that the commission's work is to come to an end in 2023. Others got the opinion that it has to start from the time when the act is coming to being, which would be from 2018, which would then take it to 2028. But I think I want to have some thoughts as to how we can ensure that the work of this commission carries on. And I also want to agree with what I think it was Otto who said it. But when you look at issues of healing and so on, we should really never be able to come to a stage where you can say that no, the work is ended. Particularly when you look at our own history as Zimbabwe. And I think one of the challenges that we have had in the past is that we are able to confront the problem. We had a transition, certainly, in 1980. But in some ways, we didn't have a transition. Because what used to happen during the pre-independence period actually carried on the culture of impunity. And you have this cycle of things repeating themselves, where you find that people talk about reconciliation and so on, and people continue doing it, knowing fully well that at the end of the day, they will get impunity, and that nothing will happen to them. If you look at some of the incidents of violence which took place during election periods, even after 1980. So at the end of the day, all right, I'll try. It's not very easy to summarize, especially. Anyway, I'll try my level best. I appreciate that we're running out of time. But anyway, we really need to deal with that issue. And also, the last point I'm going to talk about is the issue of the political will. Do we have it? I think that's one thing, especially for those in my other life.
Okay.
Are we committed? And I think that is where we have to ensure that we move in such a way that we are able to carry along those people who have got the power to make certain decisions. So that at the end of the day, it doesn't end up being a talk show, where from time to time we continue talking and so on, but action do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I will have my brother over there, and then last one here for this round, and then quick remarks from the panel before I get back. I know they are heated. Yeah, you can. Just try to be brief so that we allow others time.
I'll be very brief.
Yeah.
I'll just have to know from the Commissioner how far they've gone with the issue of decentralizing their offices so that victims can have access.
Thank you also. And then over here, just try to be brief, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Segai Gome. I represent an organization called Zimbabwe Political Victims Foundation Trust. And I would like to say we should have equal rights when it comes to names. Though my name is Segai, but I'm a man. Okay, fine. My question is directed to Commissioner Ndoro. In response to the NPRC, how practicable is NPRC going to engage with survivors of organized violence and torture, given that it is one of its strategic launch values? Is it not a ceremonial value, given that we as victims are being given lipstick recognition? I read there is this gender unit. Why not having a victims unit that deals with issues that is to do with victims? I can see we are being recognized by some civil society organizations that have an interest with issues that is to do with victims. Organizations like Zimbabwe Youth Zimbabwe, and many other organizations. But as I have been going through literature from the NPRC, I see there is this gender unit, but I don't see this victims unit. I'm a victim of organized violence and torture, and I feel a bit of injured when issues that is to do with victims are not being adequately addressed by the NPRC. Thank you.
Thanks, Sekai. Quick responses from the panel. I think most were comments. So most of the questions were directed to the NPRC. So I'll start with you, Commissioner.
Okay. Sekai.
This is on. Yeah.
The National Peace and Reconciliation Commission is about victims. Everything that we do is about victims. It was set up to deal with issues of victims. So to say that there is nothing in the NPRC is possibly an oxymoron, because the commission is about victims. If you look at the functions, post-conflict justice, truth-telling, dialogue facilitation, conciliation, research, investigations, is everything about victims. If you look at the vision, if you look at the mission, if you look at the principles, if you look at the values, it's everything about victims. Victim-centered, because the work, the commission was set up to deal with victims. I think that's what I can say.
Decentralization?
Decentralization of offices, yes. The statutory instrument, the law actually requires us to decentralize in all the 10 offices. We have, as I've said, we've put in place, we've finalized our strategic plan document. I think some of you came to the launch. It's on our website, and what we are going to do now, because all the development partners who wanted to help us wanted this document first. And we also didn't want to run with this document before we did proper consultation. So it was a bit of a chicken and egg. But now, because last week but one, we launched this, we have a lot of indicators for people organizations that would like to assist us to decentralize. What we have agreed as a commission is there is no person who is going to cut across provinces. We are going to decentralize and employ people who come from that province. So if it is an office in Manicaland, we are going to employ people in Manicaland. If it is in Matabeleland South, which is the most beautiful province, we have it in Gwanda. And so, yes, we are going to decentralize, we are required to decentralize, and we have partners who are willing to assist us decentralize. And also, because our provinces, we represent provinces, we are also going to do the same. Yeah.
Okay, and the sunset clause that
and just to add on that, you'll realize that the majority of the victims, especially when you look at the issue of Ubraundi, they're actually at village level. And some of them are elderly, they cannot even walk. And they would want in their lifetime to access the commission. We are cognizant in terms of that particular fact. And funds permitting, we're focusing actually at decentralizing up to district level. And on the issue of the time frame in terms of the commission, well, I would also request Honorable Gonese to also assist the commission by pushing that agenda at Parliament. We as a commission have written to the AG's office in order to find out when exactly is our starting time. Is it at swearing in? Is it at the promulgation of the Act? And we have since not received a response, but we are then calling upon civil society and the various actors also to come in and actually amplify our voice on that particular note, so that at least we can get a response. Thank you.
Thank you. Otto, any remarks? No?
Yes.
Tony?
Just a comment about holistic strategy. Sometimes you have to see the thing holistically, but you apply it in a different way. So maybe they're low-hanging fruit. I mean, one of the things from Sekai is maybe one of the low-hanging fruit is about rehabilitation. That might be a much easier task to do, and I know of those reservations about that. But Zimbabwe's got an incredible history of being able to do primary health care and deliver things towards communities, and that might be a priority to be able to do something. But sometimes I think when you're trying to do the whole thing in all the lines, in every single theme, that might be just too difficult. And some things are going to have to be timed differently. I personally believe that if we work really hard between Ministry of Health, Social Welfare, and all the NGOs that we work with, we could have a health system running in under a year. The stuff would be on the ground and reaching communities. That's possible if you've got the will.
Okay. Second round, I notice, okay, we'll start from the back this time. The gentleman just outside the door, and then Mr. Quartet, and Non-Tata, and yeah, my brother over there. If you can mark the order. How many are we? If we can take 5 per batch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over there, and we'll come back for the second round so that at least we are able to.
Okay,
if you can try to be brief so that others can have the same opportunity to raise this.
Okay, my name is Obit Masaraure. I'm coming from Amoka Method Road Teachers Union of Zimbabwe. I'm a teacher in rural Zimbabwe, particularly in Weta. Now I like when you go, I will not say Mr. Comrade Otto raised the issue of police alternatives. And I think there's one area which we have to be working on. Now, our education system really celebrates the perpetrators of violence. So our learners are taught continuously from primary to secondary that those who are perpetrating violence are the victims, and those who lost the victims, their humanity is actually stolen more from the curriculum that we are studying with the learners. So this is an area of curriculum review, education system review that also we have to look at collectively. Then I like the area when we were looking on the economic theft. Now there's this tendency where the system itself steals from people. Now we should have clear policies on who will be paying after the theft. Because for example, 2008, 2009, wages were theft. Now wages are being stolen today. Someone just wakes up and says, I don't know, I'm going to be earning a salary. You are earning something that I don't know. Then after a year, then you said you can earn. So there will be need for justice. But lastly, he was raising a critical issue that we have to move away from talking. But I want to propose something beyond talking. We don't need the state-created commissions to facilitate transitional justice. We can also come in here and come up with our own people commissions on transitional justice. For example, I'm looking at a scenario where people will show on the 1st of August. We are all patiently waiting for that commission to produce a report on what happened. But why don't we have separate interviews that are conducted by us as citizens? Then we produce our own reports. Then we have people themselves knowing what actually happened. But we wait for the state-created commission to tell us what happened. When we can conduct parallel processes, we are waiting for the state itself to have a debt audit on what happened to the man that was stolen in the RPZ. When we could also institute and then ensure that as we move forward and be pushing for transitional justice, we have something on the ground that we are doing as citizens, not waiting for state-created institutions.
Thank you, Albert. David?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm David Coltart. I want to make 2 points regarding a victim-orientated process. The first is that, and I listened very closely to the Commissioner speak about the fact that the Commission is victim-orientated. My concern, though, is that a process can be victim-orientated in terms of the information it receives, but is it victim-orientated in terms of the process itself which it uses? Let me give you 2 examples regarding the Commission. Has there been any victim input regarding the appointment of the commissioners in the first place? And secondly, let me use the example of the commencement of the process earlier on this year, where advertisements were placed in the press calling on victims to come in. Were victims consulted before that process was agreed upon? Is that the process that victims themselves feel comfortable with in terms of giving evidence and the like? And these are just 2 examples where, if we are truly going to be victim-orientated, it mustn't just deal with giving them an opportunity. It must involve them having input to the process. The second point I want to make relates to the objectives of any process. And we have a real problem. I'm a lawyer and a politician, and I've been involved in civic organizations for my entire professional life. And the problem is that when you get those combinations, so I'm including myself, is that we have a tendency to dictate to victims what should happen regarding justice and reconciliation. And I think that if we're genuine about victim orientation, it must primarily involve a truth-telling opportunity, but also it must ask the victims what they perceive to be the best means of justice and reconciliation. We should not be dictating that to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Nonhlanhla, and I'm with the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. My question is to the NRPC, and it's to say, to what extent does the composition, the mandate, and the work of the NRPC reflect the very diversity that is espoused as one of its principles and values? And here I'm talking about gender, issues of gender, ethnicity, geographic representation, age, generational diversity. I mean, beyond theory, and what are the very practical ways through which this diversity and this acknowledgement of gender diversity and all other diversities is practicalized? Is there anything to show that we really are taking this very seriously? Also, are there any, in terms of the composition of the commissioners, are there any non-survivors who are appointed as, who are part of the commissioners? Thank you.
My name is Hussein Swanda. I just wanted to find out, we've heard about the issue of that now there's a new dispensation, there is political will. But I think political will can only be seen in the way in which government allocates budget and money for the NPRC. The process of transitional justice and national healing for Zimbabwe cannot be subcontracted to other people. The payment, paying the bill for that is indicative of how much political will our government has got. What is the status, besides asking for money from other people who are not government? How much money and percentage is government putting into the work of the NPRC?
Thank you. The last intervention over there.
Hello, my name is Basta Vizi. I'm a retired colonel from the Army. I would like to suggest that we seem to discuss issues But I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, we are not like people who have been involved in it and who feel the pain in it. Probably it is something that we want. Therefore, I'm looking at, are we looking at the state of woundedness within the victims so that at least we can get to a position where they can be healed? And these are the roles probably the FRC or other organizations are looking at, including the transitional justice working. Secondly, what is the relationship right now that we are looking at between the victim and perpetrator? How do we call to account those in positions of leadership? Do they have the political will? Do we here now have the muscle to bring them to justice? And if not, then we probably are using some time unproductive. Because I can't see the sheep coming from the bush running away from the jackal, only to find the jackal inside the pen. Honestly speaking, they will run. The sheep will run. Now, do we have the necessary muscle as NPRC? Do we have the necessary life to follow through these processes? Are we involving the actual victims in this thing? Who are the beneficiaries of this process? Who are the participants? I'm speaking here as a soldier who was involved in the Gukura Hunde era. And then now we are like gaining capital out of this. And yet there are people who are wounded outside there. This state of woundedness is that which we should deal with. And we have indicated also that it is intergenerational. Our children are going to say this. You revisit Turkey against Italy 150 years ago. This situation is manifesting today. This intergenerational hate and woundedness that we are feeling right now is militating against the actual tenets of whatever institution is here to do the right thing at the right time. It's very fortunate that some people have broken into this organization so that they can make a claim that they are the victims. Already they have been left out. As Zebra, we feel we were the hunted in 1980, but of course, as some people have alluded to, this would have started in 1965 when the degree of impunity started, and it has been taken over even by the Joint Operations Command system that is country-wide bedeviling justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. I will let the panelists respond. I think majority of the questions were directed to the NRC.
Yeah.
So
and
I will
we
let
knew
you
it.
go first. I see Otto and Tony are smiling, but I'm coming back. Okay, over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coltart. Let me respond to you. Maybe, I think when I presented, I don't know whether you were in the initial stages when we said, you're saying, are we not dictating to victims? Does it include truth-telling? So we are saying, truth-telling is actually a function, it's actually in the mandate of the Commission. It's in our mandate, it's the third mandate of the Commission is actually about truth-telling. Both in the Constitution and in the mandate, the functions are outlined that the Commission must, it's not a decision that we will decide to have truth-telling or not to have truth-telling. The Commission must ensure that the victims of conflicts hear the truth. And I said it's also not about truth-telling only. We have also gone on to say we will do truth-seeking. We learned from our other brothers and sisters from other African commissions that there is this necessity that you should seek the truth. While its victims come to tell the truth, but the commission can also embark on an exercise in order to unravel the truth. Are we prescribing to victims? You will see that during our provincial consultations, every group in every province, we had a victims group. We had a group of victims, and that's why sometimes there was almost degenerated into fights. I remember in Mashonaland West and in Marondera and in Bendura, the deep-seated issues. And we came here because we had put victims together. We ended up saying, okay, let's look at victims from that political party and victims from that political parties and victims in this epoch. Because you also had victims of the liberation struggle also coming through and saying, we cannot be grouped together with the post-independence victims. We want our own to be heard on our own. We want our own voice to be heard. And so these intricate dynamics, we had to make sure that we acknowledge the pain, the suffering of every victim who was present. So during the consultations, yes, whenever we hold meetings, whether it's the launch of a strategic plan, whether we have made sure that we have included a cross-cultural approach, a cross-sectoral approach to ensure that victims are also there. And the work of the commission is not going to be dictated by the conflict map. It's not going to be dictated by any other theoretical underpinnings. We are now, because we now have a strategic plan, we are now going to go into communities to let the victims talk. We have victims, we've realized the victims that really speak, who are very outspoken, but we also have victims that are too shuttered to speak. Victims who cannot say anything. And I remember when we went with Zenzele to Balag. So there is that realization in the committee. We are cognizant of that fact that there are different groups of victims. We also have primary survivors and secondary traumatized survivors. And those ones are dealt with differently. We also have survivors. So what I'm basically saying, Mr. Coltart, is that the commission is conscious. The commission is aware. And no one is going to prescribe. So when we go to those communities, we will discourage people coming to those communities to speak on behalf of victims. Lest there are victims who are too shuttered to speak, who will not speak. So we are very sensitive, we are very conscious, we have put in place strategies to ensure that it is the victims. If they say we want an apology, that is coming from a victim. If they say we want reparation, that should come from a victim. If they say, because people heal differently, if we impose, and we are in the process of developing an index in order to see whether somebody has healed, then if that is imposed by anybody else, whether it's the commission or anybody else, other than the victim, it means the work of the commission has gone to waste. It is the victim that will determine that they are healed. Because as I have said, this is an issue of the body, soul, and spirit, and so the victim is central. The issue of, somebody asked it on composition. Is it sensitive? That was the work of the policymakers. There is a clear demarcation between what the policymakers do, and I'm very glad that they are here. That policymakers are here. We have that's the separation of powers. The policymakers determine the qualities, and if you look at the constitution, I think maybe that input possibly could have been made during the constitutional process. They only talked about knowledge, integrity, exposure, skills, ability, and so forth, and gender. So that was the role of Parliament. The standing rules and orders that interviewed us is the one that set the criteria. And so, but in terms of gender composition, yes, there are 4 men, there are 4 men, 4 women, and 5 men, with a total of 9. Sorry?
So there was also regional balance.
There was also regional balance that's come from there, but that was the work of. If the standing rules and orders, I don't know if the policymakers would also want to comment on that, they would be the best placed people to talk about it. Yes.
And I think also on that particular note, it's also important, especially when it comes to the advertisement or the submission of nominations, perhaps for Chapter 12 institutions, that you should also develop a relation with your legislators, especially the policymakers, especially in terms of giving feedback to their particular constituencies on what is going on. That would also assist those perhaps who have an intention of responding or who perhaps to be nominated towards those processes. So especially us as a commission, it becomes difficult to comment on that particular process because also as commissioners, we did not know each other. We only came to know each other upon being appointed, and then on the, but our strategy now as a commission as we move after the launch of our strategic plan is the employment of the secretariats that we find key, especially in terms of implementation. So in terms of our implementation strategy, just like my colleague has actually noted that when we are employing as a commission, we will be sensitive to issues of ethnicity. We will not deploy someone to a place who's not conversant with the local language. If it's an office in Beitbridge, we'll prioritize vendor speaking and Sotho speaking people in Beitbridge because it will make it easier for them to interface with what the victims in their native language. So these are some of the issues that we would do, especially in terms of engaging the secretariat, because it also becomes conflictual to actually deploy someone who speaks perhaps a language that cannot be understood by the locals.
Yeah, I also wanted to respond to Reverend Hussain's when you said how much is the political, how much political will is there if there is no allocation of resources. It's a very important insight. Maybe English being a second language, I should have said relative political will, because previously we couldn't work. But now, at least we are able to engage stakeholders. And I'm very glad in the Constitution, I think where also Otto was saying, what do you do with state organs? There is a provision in the Act that says the Commission is empowered to call upon every state organ to perform its function as required by law. So we have called upon the police, we've called upon the Central Intelligence. Actually, the police has a specific mandate in the Act. And there are also punitive measures in the event that the state organ does not cooperate with the Commission. So, relatively, I can say before and after analysis, we are at a much better position than we were before. We are able now to engage victims without any backlash. We are able to engage the organs, all the organs of the state as required by law. We are able to assert that we are independent. Before we couldn't even talk of independence. So we are relative, but the issue of resources, it is very important that we would love to be like South Africans who got $18 million a year for 2.5 years, so that we can do all this work. But we know that also government has limited resources. But it's a very good.
The other question around whether you think you have the sufficient muscle to invest let's get to
In fact, on that particular note, also responding on that of the issue. First and foremost, I would like to say, as a commission, we are also alive to the fact that even the usage of the term new dispensation is a contestation on its own. So, in the field of peace building, we try, by all means, to actually rather say the government of Zimbabwe. Because if we then say it's a new dispensation, we might also be taken to be siding with a particular what? Side. So, on that particular note, we also, in the aspect of resources and so on, what we have done as a commission, we will continue requesting for resources, and above all, in terms of whether the commission has did. We have an act, and in terms of our operational mandate, we are guided by the act, and we will stick and abide to the act. This is what we promise, especially as a commission. Just like my colleague has actually said, there has actually been an outcry that perhaps this commission is not a truth-telling commission, but as she did say it, I would also kindly request our colleagues to actually go through the act, especially when it comes to third function, which says to bring about national reconciliation by encouraging people to tell the truth about the past and facilitating the making of amends and the provision of justice. This is where the truth-telling component comes in. So at times it's very difficult to answer someone. So I feel as peace builders or people who are within the peace building field to actually get this act, and then at least our arguments can actually be informed by what? By the act. Because in terms of our operational framework, we are guided by the act.
Thank you. We have questions that are coming in from our social media interactions. I see they are burning questions, and we had committed that we'll break at 1:30 for lunch. I don't want to violate your right to food anymore. We are still here. We are still engaging. Yes, Father, please. He wants to. Okay. Sorry. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. I think give my commissioners a pam-pam. Some of the questions that are being asked related to the nomination of some commissioners are beyond them. For your own information, I went to Harare because someone said there are going to be interviews. Where are you? I was out in the fields. Whether you bless those fields, call that or not, and I had to rush there. My name was put across amongst the 12 that were there. But I can't question those who are in the hierarchy to say, why did I not at that point in time? But suffice is to say that my name came up then, and I was asked to take the task of being chairman. So my nomination was not in line with those that were there. It was a different thing, and I think politicians know that the president makes a decision to say so and so must come up. We are a people-orientated commission. We listen very careful, and even listen to the lawyers, you know. Mr. Colton, we do listen, and we have been listening. We have noted what you have said,
And section F, this is why they had the lawyer there, because to receive and consider complaints from the public and to take such action in regard to the complaints as it considers appropriate. We've heard your complaints. It's really encouraging to hear you talk. I'm not promising this, but my commission and I have now had an office in Harare and the next office, so that we can hear you from here, is going to be in Bulawayo, because that is going to be an operational office. But the problem that we have is that of money. We have even gone to Parliament to say, can you support us? I'm glad there are 3 parliamentarians here, and they are going to support us so that we can have an office here as a matter of urgency. I can tell you we will provide the primary evidence. You know about the primary evidence that is necessary in order to heal the nation. You have heard me, my brother. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to have the questions from the social media interaction, and I've closed for the plenary. Please bear with me. We can continue even after, so that at least we allow ourselves more time to engage and have that. So just quickly come up, and then as they respond, if there are any remarks, you then conclude as well.
Okay, yes, thank you. My name is Mnyara Zikova, and we'll just look at some of the interactions we've had from our social media. I will not look at everything, I just picked a few because of time. We do realize that when Justice Nale was still presenting, he did mention that reconciliation can only be attained if the perpetrator restores what was lost. And one of the immediate responses we had, Justice, was that we hope he will stand by his word, or lie, he apologies. In terms of, we've heard about the apologies. And when Commissioner Choice Ndoro was actually talking about Zimbabwe has been divided since the 1980s, one of the first and immediate reactions we had was somebody saying, agreed, these are illogical and self-inflicted divisions are our biggest undoing, e.g. race, tribe, a change of mindset and perception is needed today rather than tomorrow. It's also worth mentioning that this hate further deepened and took a turn for the West in post-independence in 1980. So that was a comment, and then we also have a few questions. We have somebody here actually asking, saying, but there is contested truths in Zim on the space of victims and perpetrators. We have another one saying the open contestation of the truth between victims and perpetrators might not only need time, but also specific settings. And we have just the last two. They say, is there a chance of finding and establishing a minimal core of shared truths or transformative truth that opens up the road to the future, or will the range of permissible denial and even lies only be narrowed? That was a question. And we have another one saying, in transitional and post-conflict Zim, collective memos are deeply divided between those who are and see themselves as victims and those who are defined as perpetrators but are rarely willing to accept such a label.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. You will agree with me that these questions are going to the core of our deliberations, not necessarily for the panel. So we keep it at the back of our mind, and as we deliberate, we also try to address them. And I believe the participants are also listening, and they will be following even the proceedings that are going to follow. I will ask our panelists to just give me 1 minute closing remark, and then we go for that. If you don't have, just keep your peace. It's still okay.
Can I borrow your constitution 1 second, please? Just one comment. very important part of the Constitution is to go right to the very beginning of it. Just give me 1 second. You go to the preamble, because it says something very important. And it says, obligations are binding on every single person, right? And basically, including the state, all legislative, blah, 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 must be fulfilled with them. But basically what the preamble says is that we are also responsible. And sometimes I hear a kind of entitlement idea about they must fix it. And I never know who they are until I clear myself that I'm part of they fixing it. And that's a very important part of this process. People have to get involved in it. There's no single institution that is going to solve our problems in Zimbabwe. It's going to take collective effort, and that means we all have to do it.
Thanks, Tony. Otto? Thank you. Commissioner Ngwe?
No,
1 minute parting remark.
Yeah, just to say, as a commission, we are open in terms of engagement and dialogue.
Thank you. Commissioner Ndoro?
As a commission and as people of Zimbabwe, we would like to leave a legacy of peace for ourselves and our children.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. I think this has been an amazing session, quite stimulating. I would have loved to hear more, both from the audience and also from the panelists. But like I said, we still have at least 2 additional days, 2.5 days to deliberate. So let's go and enjoy our lunch. And we're coming back. We are 30 minutes, I think, behind schedule. I will ask Zigamai to do just a brief housekeeping announcement.